It is a slightly cooler, if not still warm, September afternoon/evening. Soon, I will be on my way to catch a screening of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. The Mission Impossible franchise is an interesting one, so to speak. The very first one was directed by Brian De Palma, who is best known for the work of Scarface among other movies. The sequel was directed by John Woo. The third movie was directed by J.J. Abrams. Fourth one was directed by Brad Bird. And since the fifth movie, Rogue Nation, they've been handled by Christopher McQuarrie. What I find interesting is that ever since Ghost Protocol, the franchise has developed a habit of creating this new standard and then immediately creating an even better one with the subsequent movie. When Ghost Protocol came out in 2011, the franchise had been on hiatus for a good 6 years. And here it came out of the gate absolutely swinging with some fantastic stunts and action sequences. Nobody thought it could be topped. Then Rogue Nation had Tom Cruise hanging out the side of the plane, and wow, it turns out it could be topped. Then Fallout did something even better, and it just gets crazier from there. Now we're at the 7th movie, Dead Reckoning Part 1, which I'm a little apprehensive about. More often than not, when a movie has Part 1 in the title, it's the studio's way of saying, hey, you like this movie? Well then you better come back in a year's time for the conclusion. What's strange is that the two-parter is usually reserved for the finale of a franchise, and Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie have made it clear that they have no intentions of stopping after Dead Reckoning Part 2. And if that's the case, why add the Part 1 and Part 2 monikers? Even if it is one big overarching story, you still don't want to call it Part 1 and Part 2. The people at Marvel knew that Infinity War and Endgame would be a much better sell than Infinity War Part 1 and 2. By putting Part 1 in the title, you're essentially baiting the audience into seeing a sequel that they don't even know if they want to see. It doesn't end on a narratively satisfying note, but at the same time, it makes you kind of contractually obligated to go see the second half. I thought we were all in agreement that we would let the Part 1 and Part 2 subtitles die along with the young adult adaptation genre. Regardless, this will be my 4th Mission Impossible movie that I see in a theater, and none of them have let me down so far, so let's choose to accept this mission and get on with it. Oh geez, that was kind of dragging on by the end. First up, I have to give some high praise to the set pieces in this movie. Not just the bombastic action sequences, but the more intricate ones. The tailing missions, if you will. There's one scene in particular where you can feel the tension between characters, almost as if it was a physical presence. The best way I could describe it would be a high-profile game of poker. Nobody really has a winning hand, but they're all trying to bluff the other people into folding. Hayley Atwell was a nice addition to the franchise, but I wish it didn't come at the cost of putting Rebecca Ferguson in the backseat. This is one of the 3 glaring issues I have with this movie. It has way too many characters to balance out. In fact, there's characters that come back in later in the movie that you had almost completely forgotten about. I get that the Mission Impossible series is meant to be this world full of international spy agencies and black market arms dealers and such. But I feel like by the time you get to the 7th installment of a franchise that's been going on for the better part of 3 decades at this point, you should have mastered or be somewhat aware of how to properly weave and integrate all these different characters without the movie feeling bloated. Just look at John Wick Chapter 4. It introduced new characters, new parts of the criminal underworld, more lore to this universe without it feeling like it was too much or it was overblown. And that brings me along to my second point. This movie clocks in about 2 hours and 35 minutes. Now, if I've said this once, I've said it countless times. In fact, at this rate, you could probably make a compilation of the times I've said it. You cannot judge the quality of a movie purely by looking at the runtime. As famous film critic Roger Ebert once said, no bad movie is too short, and no good movie is too long. That being said, and as much as I love the Mission Impossible movies, there were moments, entire scenes in this movie that just dragged on. I won't get into spoilers here, but the train sequence just kept going, and going, and going. At one point I thought to myself, are they just going to keep going until they eventually run out of train? When Christopher McQuarrie mentioned that there was a 4-hour cut of the train sequence, was that just 4 hours of Haley Atwell and Tom Cruise climbing up the train cars until they eventually got to the end? From what I've heard about the production of this movie, what they did was they made up action sequences first and then they wrote the script around it. And that brings me to my third glaring issue. Now, let's be honest, the Mission Impossible movies aren't known for their phenomenal scripts. Half the dialogue is just spy movie jargon, and the other half is witty one-liners. But there was something off with this movie. I mean, there's a scene early in the movie where there's these people meeting about discussing this AI, and it's... I don't know how to put it. It's like they all had to have a say in the conversation. There was no one actor or one character who didn't say something important. And I don't know if it was edited together like that, or if that's the way they were told to act, but it felt like they were sort of, I don't know, finishing each other's sentences. It's like they couldn't have one person in the room not contribute anything to the conversation. They had to say something. It was almost like a game of, I don't know. It reminded me of this game I played in middle school, junior high school drama class. The game was that one person was a pointer and there was 4 other people in front of them. The idea was that the person would point to one person, they would start telling the story, and then the pointer would point to someone else and that person would continue the story. Okay, your line. Cut, your line. Your line. The flow of that conversation just felt unnatural, and they were more than a few moments like that. And like all movies that have part 1 in the title, this one ends on a cliffhanger, with still quite a bit of the story to go. I still don't understand why they didn't just change part 2 to a different title, or this one to a different title, and give the second half the title Dead Reckoning. Were they worried that audiences were catching on to the gimmick after Infinity War Part 2 changed to Endgame, or Across the Spider-Verse Part 2 changed to Beyond the Spider-Verse? End of the day, though, if you're a fan of the Mission Impossible movies, a fan of Tom Cruise movies, or just a fan of action movies in general, or you just need some good entertainment to see, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is a solid to strong recommend.